next level. What does it take to get to the next level of life? I understand some people aren't interested in that because people get discouraged. People honestly sometimes get lazy in life. People get settled in. They don't want to rock the boat. They get comfortable. But our God-given nature is to excel and to be successful in life, to put our hands to things and to accomplish things and to be prosperous in life. And by that I don't mean, I'm not talking about American prosperity, getting rich and stuff. I'm talking about prosperity like God talked about with the Moses generation. Entering that land flowing with milk and honey and just not just eking by in life, fulfilling the dreams of your heart. God puts stuff in us. I believe in our mother's womb that we can see hints of, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later on, but not tonight. Just trying to investigate our own souls and see the little hints that God dropped in us with little dreams and desires and things that you're prone to and things that you enjoy more than other things. And those are often little hints that lead to things that God has designed for your life. This is our fourth week talking about next level. The first week we talked about step one. You got to look at this as a staircase. And step one, before anything else, was taking 100% responsibility for your life. And there's not a week that goes by that I don't have at least a couple encounters with people where that's just a major issue in their life. And if you only have a couple encounters with people, you're probably having a good week. A lot of you all with your jobs, you probably face this a lot. I know you face this a lot on your job. And in teaching, you would face this a lot. And people are always blame shifting, scapegoating. They can never get ahead. They can never do any better because they don't have this, they don't have that. This person did that or they didn't do that. And history will not back those people. History backs it. It doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, who backed you, who didn't back you, what resources you started with. All things are possible. And for us as Christians, it's an emphatic promise. All things are possible. You've got to take 100% responsibility for your life. The second thing we talked about is you've got to be willing to change. And I know people don't like that. You know, people make fun of Christians, especially the old church, that nobody likes to change. And it's true, churches don't like to change. But it's indicative of human nature. We don't like to change. We get comfortable with who we are, and we want the environment to become conducive to who we are. Am I right? We want everyone to oblige us. It doesn't work that way in the real world, especially if you want to be successful in life. And last week we talked about making our character a priority, becoming people of integrity. The ripple effect of integrity is mind-blowing. People trip and stumble into success. They stumble into prosperity. They stumble into favor just by being people of integrity. And tonight we're going to talk about something completely different. And we can look at it as a fourth step, but we're getting to the place now where once you get past the first three steps, I think the first three steps, for the most part, need to be in that order, or at least being worked together in an early order. And now maybe we don't have to be as critical about the order of the steps, but just critical in that there's steps that can't be missed if we want to go to the next level in life. And tonight I want to talk about perspective. Perspective. I didn't realize till today, because I'm starting to do this more. I told you I did it last week with the word integrity, because you know what a word means. I mean, no one has to look up the word perspective or how to perceive to understand what that means. And so today I did, and I did not realize that for a long time was just an architectural term. And we adapted it to other things in life. And it was talking about looking at things from different angles and views in architecture and how you structure buildings and cities and stuff like that. I didn't realize that originally was just an architectural term. But it talked about the angle that you look at things, the different views. Well, we understand what it means. Perspective, how you perceive something. Here is a passage of Scripture from the great wise Solomon that, boy, if I had nickel for every time I preach from this passage in the last 35 plus years, I can at least go get me a Happy Meal or something. But I'm going to read it in NIV, and I'll tell you what it says in the version that you're mostly listening. You know it from. Proverbs 29:18, where there is no revelation, the people cast off restraint. You've mostly heard it, where there is no vision, my people perish. For lack of vision, my people perish. And so we took that word vision and we adapted it to American culture in the 20th century in the church, and we used that term to represent the vision of a local church. Now, our vision is to be a contemporary church where you dress casually and you play loud rock and roll music and you preach a lot of grace, and that's our vision, and lots of children's ministry. But that was an American adaptation to that term. That's not even remotely what God was talking about with that term. The NIV uses the word revelation to reveal. King James, the word vision. But all the word is talking about is how you view something, how you perceive something, your perception of things. For lack of vision, my people perish, God said. For the way that they look at things, because they fail to look at the bigger picture, or they fail to look at it from different angles. They perish because they miss things. They don't see things that God wants them to see, whether it's something spiritual or just something very personal for their life that God wants them to see, because they can't see it. How many of you guys remember about 4 years ago, I preached a 4 Sunday series called Saw. Remember, anyone in here you see the Saw movies? And I played off of it. Anyone remember the year we played off movies the whole year? That was fun, wasn't it? That's been one of my favorite years. Listen to this with perspective, okay? Before God can take you to the next level or a new season in life, you must change your perspective. It's contingent upon the next season, the next level, the new season of God. Wherever you're at, you are there based on your perspectives of life, how you perceive life. Where you are at right now, it's a place that you're seated in life, and you have a very specific view, whatever that view is. How you view God, how you view church, your worldview, your political views, your marriage views, your child views, whatever the views are, you have a very specific set of perspectives right now from where you are at, okay? But before you can go to the next level, you've got to be willing now to change your perspective, how you perceive things, okay? Because how you perceive things will determine how you respond to things. Now think about that just for a second. How you view things, how you perceive things, it determines how you respond. Whatever's going on in your life, your response to whatever's going on anywhere in your life is all just a result of how you see something. Am I right? How you perceive something. So you've got to change your perspective, because how you perceive things will determine how you respond to things. And how you respond to things determines the result of those things. However anything in your life turns out, it is only the result of how you responded to it. It could have turned out 50 different ways. If you have any life experience here tonight at all, you know that's absolutely the truth. You look back at many things in your life and you say, well, it didn't have to be that way. Well, no, it didn't have to be that way. If you would have responded differently, there would have been a different result. Well, why didn't you respond differently? Because you didn't perceive it differently. You have to be willing to change your perspective, to change how you respond, to change the result. Accomplishments will always, always, always be limited to perceptions. There's no exceptions. Your accomplishments in life, with your job, your spiritual accomplishments, ministry accomplishments, your walk with God, accomplishments in your marriage, your child raising, whatever venue you go into, your accomplishments are always going to be limited to how you perceive. Now, I mean, you guys came to Couples Connection a couple Sunday nights ago. And if you've been here through the years and you used to come to that when we did it monthly, you know that when the dust clears, what Couples Connection has been about with the different video series that we've watched, Jimmy Evans being probably the best of anything we've ever watched there, it's mostly about changing how you perceive marriage and how you perceive your spouse. A great deal of marriage counseling is about changing how people perceive their spouse. If you come to premarital counseling, which we need to get started real soon, on the front end of premarital counseling, the only thing we deal with is gender differences. Because till people learn how to perceive the other gender, then you can't have a good marriage. If you're a man and you don't understand anything about the differences that a woman brings to the table, you're just going to think she's crazy. And you'll think she's the only one. Until you meet other women, and you go, they're all crazy. Because that's how you were to perceive it as a man. If you're a woman, and you don't have your perception of men radically challenged and changed, you'll think all men are shallow. Because we're not touchy-feely. We use 3 words when you guys would use 50 words. And you know, these guys are shallow. They don't even want to talk about anything. They just want to grunt and fart. That's all they want to do. Do you need to do more? Really? Child raising. We read books, and every time we read a new book or manual on parenting, all we're doing is getting a different perception of child raising, right? And we're going, okay, I want to see this from a different view. That's what, when we read child raising manuals to no avail, all we're doing is trying to see child raising from a different angle, a different view. Perception will see opposition in life as opportunity or excuse. It's all in how you perceive it. Things happen all the time. We face giants, we face wildernesses and unexpected surprises in life. And they floor us, hit us between the eyes, and stall us in our tracks, and it happens all the time. It can be job things, vocational things. It can be health issues. It can be marriage things. It can be all kinds of things. Things we didn't see coming. Things we're putting our hands to. We're trying to accomplish. We're trying to be successful, but it just blew up in my face. It comes down to perception. If we see that now as a failure and we're going to throw the towel in, or if we're going to look at that and we're going to learn from that. Perception will see opposition as opportunity or excuse. Perception will see failure as a lesson or discouragement. You may look at a failure in life and become very discouraged and say, well, that's it. I give up. I'm not going to try that anymore. A different view, a different perception would look at it and go, okay, it didn't work that way this time, but I'm looking at it from a different view now, and I wonder if I try from this angle, if it'll work. Now, we know the classic example here of this, don't we? Of failure leading to an eventual success. Who's the classic person that we always use as the example? Tried 1,000 times before he was successful. Thomas Edison. So someone asked him once he finally got to 1,001 and the light bulb continued burning, they said, Mr. Edison, how does it feel to have failed 1,000 times? He said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. He said, there was 1,000 steps to my success. That is the difference in perception right there. Your perception will lead you to be optimistic or pessimistic. Pessimistic because, this isn't working. It's just not my thing. I'm tired of trying. I guess this is just me. It's not my call. It's not my skill set. And sometimes that may be right. Mostly people in American culture just have false expectations of how easy it is to succeed. You may stumble into a quick success every once in a while in life. Take it from what I think is a normal human being like the rest of you. We see the successes and we shine lights on them. But I like some of the memes and stuff I see posted every once in a while. It's like if you knew the rest of my story. We see the success and we applaud people. Oh, how wonderful, and boy, you're so lucky, and boy, I wish I were you. And it's like, if you only knew what it took to get to this point. A lot of failure. So, how many military people we got? One, I know for sure. Jody. I don't know if you guys saw action on it. Of course, it might be a little different in warfare nowadays, but through most of human history and most of warfare, the common scenario has been someone is fortified and the other army is trying to advance on that fortification, or they're meeting in the middle of a field somewhere, okay? And they're trying to outflank, outmaneuver each other. The old days, someone would be in a castle, right? Or they maybe even as late as Vietnam, they'd be hiding in the jungle somewhere, holed up in caves, or in World War I, trench warfare. Whatever the case may be, it'd be two armies fighting, and it would be common if one army was well entrenched, well fortified, the other army is the one having to be on the offensive, the other one more on the defensive. It'd be very rare for the offensive army to just storm the ballast or storm the trench or whatever one time and win. It would be multiple advances, right? You'd come at it with troops this way, get beat back, have to fall back, and then the great military mind that would be there, the general or whoever would be there, now they would come around from this end. They would be looking for the soft spot. They'd be looking for the way in. That's one of the greatest examples of perception. Great military leaders charging the line multiple times, trying to learn. They're standing back. In the older days of warfare, which I watch a lot of military channel. Anyone here like to watch the military channel? My wife says I'm a warmonger. I'm not a warmonger, but I'm fascinated by war. I always have been, from as far back as you can chase it into history. And it would be common, the general or whoever would be the architect of that battle plan. Where are they? They're on the highest knoll, right? They're on the highest position that you can get. I was watching, there's been a lot of World War II in color on lately on the History's military channel, and a lot of stuff on Patton, a lot of D-Day stuff in the last few weeks. And Patton was famous for that. Patton liked to find the high ground, and he liked to get up there with his big old binoculars, and he would like watch the war unfold in front of him, and he could tell he was a great strategist, especially with tank warfare. But it was only because he usually would get a high vantage point, so he'd have a good view of the field. And that leads me to one of the descriptions of human perception that we all need to think about tonight and see where we fit in. And that is, are we a big picture person or a little picture person? I call it pie people and slice people. That's just my terminology. Are you looking at the whole pie, or are you just looking at your slice? I've had that conversation with so many people in leadership here through the years. I've had it with people who are leaders. I've had it with people who want to be leaders. I've had it with people who want to be leaders and tried to be leaders and never became leaders, because there was always a place in the machine for slice people. People who, this is all they see, is that speaker right there. And that speaker needs to sound right, it needs to be positioned right, it needs to be set right. We've got to get the EQ just right on it, make sure it's powered up, make sure it's cut off. I can't get past that speaker right there. There's always places in the machine for people like that, detail people. Trouble is those people are never going to be allowed to be leaders, not just here, but anywhere in life. Because to go to the next level of life where you are overseeing people and projects and you're overseeing bigger seasons of life with more responsibility, you have no choice. You have to become pie people. You have to be able to see big pictures. You know one of the big differences between big picture people and little picture people? Big picture people hardly ever fight and argue about anything. Little picture people fight and argue about everything, because their whole view is through the filter of this one thing that's important to them. And I have common conversations with people all the time that is in an area of ministry, and they'll come to me, they'll be very upset about something, and I'll say, what's going on? They'll tell me what's going on. I'll understand why they're upset, and I'll say, well, let me explain to you what's going on around this scene. Let me explain the bigger picture. You know what they always end up saying? Oh, well, I didn't know all that. And then they're okay. Some people just do not train themselves to see bigger pictures. Some people, maybe God created them to be detailed people. By the way, I'm very fond of detailed people, especially when they understand that is who they are. They're a detailed person, and they understand their role, because whether it's industry or a local church like this, we would have shut the door years ago without detailed people. The detailed people are the ones who see what I don't see. Because I'm so busy seeing the whole pie, the whole big picture, that I miss the details. My wife is a detailed person. My wife is not the big picture person. My wife and I argue about stuff with Cornerstone Family Church. Not all the time, but time to time to time. Because there's a specific situation with a specific person, and there's a specific set of emotions going on, and she's just all over that now, and I need to do something about that. I need to fix that, and it's a good thing that she comes to me with that, because I don't usually know anything about it. She's the one that keeps me informed, who's having surgeries. We rarely find out if anybody's mad or not, because people don't come and tell you. They just leave, and then it's usually something that can be fixed. I don't know if you know, but families fight, but they're still family. If we can ever get that concept in the body of Christ, we'll end up being closer in the end. But she's the one that sees that stuff, and I could not do this without her. But I remind her every once in a while, when she begins to act like that I need to become more like her, that this place also would have folded years ago. I have to be a big picture person. I have learned you can train yourself to be a big picture person. I was not born a big picture person. I was not born that way. I had to be willing to change through the years, and I had to learn how to become a big picture person. Now, how many of you guys like football? This is not always the case, but it used to be the norm, and I remember when it was the norm. It's still the norm, maybe in the NFL more than college, but I have noticed that they're coming back to it. How many knows that every football team has an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator, and then you have a head coach? Where's the head coach usually at? On the field. Where's the offensive and the defensive coordinator usually at? Way up there in the nosebleed, by the press boxes up in there. They're looking down. Why do you think that is? So they can see the field? Do you think that if you're standing on the field, the same level as all the players, and I'm standing here and here's the field, do you think I can really see what's going on? Do you know most head coaches do not call the plays, right? Offensive or defensive. They've hired people to do that. And why do they do that? Because they see the field. You know what they do when they call certain plays and it's not working right? They're looking down on it and they can see what's breaking down. They can see because their run pattern just keeps blowing up in their face because there's a left guard so good on that team that no one can get by him, and it just they see those things. For a team to be successful, there has to be people with a big picture view. We want to all be successful as God wants us to be. I understand that's a very subjective term, successful. I'm not speaking about that, again, in American terms, like you're going to be a rich CEO and 25 cars in your garage. Forget that mess. That's American stuff. I'm talking about what God would call successful when he says, I want you to be successful everywhere you step in life. Whatever that is, we have to train ourselves to see bigger pictures, to see the field. Again, what happens if you don't? If you're right down here where everything is in your face, you're going to think what you see is reality. The close-up view is rarely going to be the reality in life. Rarely. You've got to step back. How many's ever heard the stupid expression, you can't see the forest for the trees? Do you understand what that means? If there's a forest right here, and it starts right here, and here's the first tree, and I'm standing right here, what am I going to see? The first tree. I can't see the forest. And we fight in America. Oh my gosh. The ridiculous, childish fights we have exemplified in politics more than any place else. And I'll set a non-party person who doesn't like any of them, and I'll listen to them, and I'll listen to their arguments, and I'll go, you know what? I'm just a normal little pastor in a small town. I'm nothing compared to what you guys are supposed to be. I see this picture a whole lot bigger than you guys do. What you're arguing about, that's not reality. What you're arguing about, that's not reality. I think us commoners have a little bigger view sometimes of life than the people who are in Washington. Evidently the monuments are right in front of their face or something. You have to be willing to change your view. If you change your view, you're going to change your plans. You change your view, you're going to change your approach to things. I promise you, you will not be an exception. If you change your view, how you perceive something, you will automatically change your approach to it. And the next approach might be more successful than the last approach. It might get you further down the road, further up the staircase. I wrote this down, I probably shouldn't have. Big picture people become successful leaders. Small picture people work for big picture people. Do y'all have to have a different view of your business than the people who work for you? Do you ever have little verbal tussles with people that work for you because they don't see the view the same as you? Any other business owners in here tonight that say, yep? Employees get mad at you all the time because they're just looking at what serves their purpose, benefits them, their needs, what they need in life. You have to be willing to change. And one of the things you've got to change is your perception, your perspective of life, a different perspective. How many knows what a worldview is? Everybody knows what that is? It's a pretty big thing, isn't it? How you view the world and all the intricate workings of the world, a worldview. How many of you guys would say that you have watched through the years as your worldview is constantly in change mode? I mean, I have. I mean, my perspectives in life have radically changed in the last 20, 30, 35 years. I don't even remotely see God, His kingdom, the body of Christ, America at large, things going on in the world. I don't see anything even remotely the same as I did 20 years ago. My perspective has been changing, and we have to be willing to change that. So,
Jesus said that to Peter when Peter was rebuking him for what was going to happen to him. And Jesus told him, he said, you're seeing things through the eyes of the
to make that point. You're so smart. You're always 3 steps ahead of me. You must have a higher viewing point than me. Okay. So then, if we have to be willing to change our perspectives in life, then we have to ask ourselves, how do we do that? How do we develop our perspective? How do we develop a bigger picture? How do we develop that? And it's real easy to lay out 5 things tonight. It's a little harder to do them. How do you develop a different perspective? How do you develop a bigger picture in life? A different view, getting up higher? First of all, you have to be willing to admit that your view is not the only view. Your view. Think about that. Perspectives of life, vision, views. Our views become what? Our opinions, right? Our opinions lock us into a lot of things in life. Our response to life is dovetailed into our opinions, which is dovetailed into our perspectives of life. We have to be willing to admit that our view is not the only view. I read a little story once that I just thought was so neat. I don't think I'll ever forget it. It was a father, and he was working at home in his office, and he was trying to get stuff done, and his little girl kept coming up and bugging him, wanting to play, and she kept disturbing him, and he's finally like, I am not getting anything done. He picked up a magazine. He ripped out a world map out of this magazine, and he ripped it up in little pieces then. He said, here, take these pieces of this world map and this tape and go put this map back together. She wasn't gone 2 minutes. She came back and said, here, Daddy, I'm done. He's like, how did you put that map back together so quick? She said, oh, I just turned it over. There was a lady's face on the back side. There was more than one view. And that's often the case. And we have to be willing to admit, and it's very hard because our chief sin that we have wrestled with from the beginning is what? Pride. And pride has many subcategories in life. And one of the ways it plays out, probably the most obvious for us, is that we just cannot admit look at all the wars over opinions. Religious wars, political wars, wars between nations, marriage wars, wars on the job, church wars. It goes on and on. It's all based on how we're viewing things. It's very hard for us to admit that our view is not the only view. Second thing we have to do is be willing to admit that our view is not always the right view. It's just not. I don't care how passionate we are about it. Passion does not equate to right. Is there anyone here who used to passionately believe something that now you do not on any level believe that anymore? I'm telling you, there's a whole lot of stuff doctrinally, theologically, that I used to be passionate about, fought with people about, thought people weren't really even saved if they didn't believe it. Come to find out, there was a whole bunch of people right and I was wrong. Once I started investigating some things, changing my view, changing my perception of some things, I found out I was wrong about a whole bunch of stuff. You know what I hate to admit? I bet I'm still wrong about some stuff. We have to be willing to admit that we don't always have the right view. I remember another little story that I just thought was so funny, and I imagine putting myself in this guy's shoes because I've had some things like this, almost like this, happen to me. Story of a man who went to the train station to get on the train, and he got there early. He wasn't sure of the schedule. He got there early, and he had time to kill. So he went over to the little snack bar, and he got him a cup of coffee and a pack of cookies and a newspaper. He went over to the table and put his stuff down, and he spread his newspaper out, and he sat there reading it, and about that time another man came up and sat in a chair across from his table. He was sitting there reading his paper when all of a sudden he noticed that the man across from him reached over, grabbed his pack of cookies, opened them up, and took one of his cookies and began to eat it. Well, the man was incensed. It's like, who does this guy think that he is? Just helping himself to one of my cookies. I hadn't even opened that pack yet. He sat there and thought, but man, if I say something, it could just be a fight. I don't even know what to say. But he thought, well, at least I'm not going to let him eat on my cookies. So he reached over and he took one of his cookies out and he put it in his mouth and he ate it. He looked up at the man and the man looked at him and he continued reading his paper. About that time, the man on the other side of the table reached back into the pack of cookies and took another cookie out and proceeded to eat it. The man with the newspaper just like, who does this guy think that he is? This continues back and forth with them taking turns, taking cookies out of the pack till it's completely empty. When the cookies are gone, the man across from him gets up and walks away from the table. And the guy with the paper's like, yeah, you've eaten all my cookies, there's nothing left for you, so you're leaving now. He picks his paper up to fold it up, and lo and behold, what was underneath his paper? His pack of cookies. I don't care how upset we get about how we're viewing something, how we're perceiving something, our perception of something. We're going to be wrong sometimes. We're going to be wrong. People can fight all they want and draw lines in the soil right now politically. Who's right? The right or the left? The liberals or conservatives? I'm just going to tell you, everybody's a little bit right and everybody's a little bit wrong. It's just the way it is. In your marriage, you think you've got a lock on how perfect you are and how messed up your spouse is? Yes, I understand. That's your perception. It's not reality. How many here as parents have been humbled enough to admit that your view of parenting wasn't always right and you wish you had a few do-overs? If you are a parent who says, I can't relate to that, I really need to talk to you. And I'm serious, I really need to talk to you because I need some counsel. I need some advice from a perfect parent. We've got to be willing to admit that there's more view than just ours. And we've got to be willing to admit that our view, our perception is not always the right one. Thirdly, we've got to be willing to stretch our view outside of our comfort zones. Stretching our view outside of our comfort zones. I really want to challenge people, and I don't know how to do it. I want to challenge people who aren't sure where they land on abortion and pro-choice, pro-life and all that. I'm trying to figure out how I can challenge them to go see Unplanned. I don't want them to think I'm trying to shove something down their throat. I don't want to think that I'm trying to preach to them. I don't want them to even for a second think that I'm trying to convince them that my view is right. But yet I know that's what people will think, but that's not at all what I want. I just want people to go see the movie because I want them to have their perception challenged. Because most people that are seeing the movie are already pro-life, but as the reports are coming in, as pro-choice people, a few are going to see this movie, it seems to be a general consensus. Their perception is being radically challenged. Be willing to stretch our view outside of our comfort zone. That is not something we're comfortable with. Fourthly, we've got to learn to surround ourselves with other views. That's one of the ways that we stretch our view. We stretch and change our perspective by intentionally hanging out with people of different perspectives. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. You all do understand that when you were being advised, you're being advised on perspectives that you don't currently have. That's all advisors do. It's what counselors do. I'm a counselor, not by trade, but by education. And my role is basically one thing: to change how people are seeing things, to change their view, to change their perspectives of marriage, of male and female, gender roles. We've done quite a bit of family counseling through the years here when it comes to parenting issues. Lately, just some real heavy-duty things that my biggest concern hasn't even been for the children. It's been for the parents trying to keep them alive so they can continue raising their kids. Helping parents figure out a way to cope and just get through some things. My job is onefold. It's trying to help them look at things from a different angle, get a different perspective on what is going on, because for them, the trees are so in their face they can't see the forest. And for me, I'm clear on the other side of the desk with a completely different view of their situation. Their trees are not in my face. I'm looking at their whole forest. And so it's easy for me to say, well, think about this. Try looking at it this way. That's all advice is. And Solomon, the great wise Solomon, who God says, ask me for whatever you want. I'm going to give you whatever you want. He says, I want wisdom to lead your people. That's all he asked for, wisdom to lead God's people. This man found out leading God's people and having wisdom, part of that was surrounding yourself with counsel and many advisors so that you can succeed. But what happened? Can we really call those people advisors and counselors in our life if we share the same view? But are we pretty bad about that in America? Just surrounding ourselves with people of similar perspectives. Democrats surrounded by Democrats, Republicans surrounded by Republicans, Baptists surrounded by Baptists, Pentecostals surrounded by Pentecostal, ladies who are in terrible marriages and their husband is a jerk, surround themselves with other ladies whose husbands also seem to be jerks. Husbands only surround themselves with guys who have the exact same complaints about their wives. We're really bad about it because we want to undergird our view, our perspective. We want people to tell us, you're right in how you're seeing this. And I'm telling you, we're wrong in a lot of things in how we're seeing it. We've got to intentionally surround ourselves with other views. I love talking to agnostics and atheists. I love it. I don't love that they're agnostic and they're atheists, but they are what they are. I love having conversations with. I want to hear their view. I want to hear their perspective on life. I love challenging their perspective, not to try to ram anything down their throat, but I love making them think about things, changing their view. I understand they're also trying to do that with me. But there's a big difference in people who have faith and people who are hollow inside. Empty people aren't very successful at convincing people of faith. It just very, very rarely happens. People of faith have a life, a passion, a boldness, something, an anointing, a zeal that can become very persuasive if they temper it with true wisdom. We have got to make sure that we surround ourselves with people. There's some people here that view, people that I've loved through the years that view the political scene of America very differently than I do. I love having conversations with them. Because they'll say, yeah, but Pastor Scott, you've got to remember, and then they'll tell me something. It could be a historical statement, a cultural statement, and I'll go, well, yeah, I know. I don't really know how to factor that in. And they'll go, well, yeah, but if you could factor that in, it would change how you see this. I mean, the reality is my perspectives in life in America is going to be based on the color of my skin. There's no way around that. It's no different for you. Your perspectives are going to be based on your gender, if you're male or female. If you're younger or older. If you've been through hard times, you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Your perspectives are going to be based on many, many different things, but that doesn't mean they're going to be right. Be willing to admit your view is not the only view. Be willing to admit that your view is not always right. Be willing to stretch your view outside of your comfort zone. Surround yourself with other views. And last of all, my key, Surround yourself with God's view. Anyone here still wearing your WWJD bracelet? What would Jesus do? You know what the WWJD bracelet was about? Perspective. That's all it was about. How would Jesus view this situation you're in? You're mad, you're complaining, you're calling them names, you're responding. You are responding this way. But if you can change your view, you will respond a different way. You will get a different result. So how do I need to see this? Well, how would Jesus see it? How would God see it? Mike, you are right. You know, the scenario with Peter is a good example. The Bible is full of stories where one of the central themes is God changing people's perception. Everybody God calls has this perspective in life, this view, and their view is not going to align with what God just asked them to do. God's asking them to go to a new level. He's asking them to do something that's going to take their life to a whole different realm. But they can't do it as long as they're where they're at, because they're perceiving things in a way that it just can't be accomplished. So they go through stuff. They go through things that dabbles with their perceptions in life, their view of life. It starts radically changing how they view God. Story after story where people's perception of other people is radically changed. Some were successful, some weren't. Jonah was not a success case. God trying to change his view of his fellow humans. There were a lot of success stories in the Bible. Jonah was not one of them. He never would change his view, his human view, his perception of people that weren't exactly like him, that agreed with him. He couldn't change his view. God used him to accomplish something, but it really didn't serve Jonah any great purpose. The Bible is full of God taking common, normal people like us, asking them to do something way beyond them, much bigger than them. Their perceptions are changed, their views are changed, and in the end they become world movers and world shakers. They become the people that God said, let me tell you their story. But if perception doesn't change, then how we respond to life doesn't change. Our accomplishments do not change. In 20 years from now, you are still exactly who you are, exactly where you are today. Nothing will have changed. Some people are okay with that. I believe God's people should never be okay with that. Now, Paul said, we are seated in heavenly places with Christ Jesus. Heavenly places. From the very beginning, the Bible separates the realms of the heaven and the earth. And sometimes heavenly realms, it's different terminologies that are used, and translators sometimes squabble about what it means. Heavenly realms means spiritual realms. That's all it means, spiritual realms. But a spiritual realm is higher than a natural realm. It's above the earth. That's why we're always called to crush things under our feet. The devil lives in the dust of the earth. We're supposed to crush him under our heel. Because we're of a higher order. We're seated in heavenly realms, higher realms, spiritual realms. We're not of this world. The word is eros, which speaks of the earth and the earth's cultures and the earth's mindsets. The Bible says we're not of those realms. We're of a higher order, which means we have a different view of the world. We have a different view of people. We have a different view of what's going on. When we look at what's going on in politics in America right now, worldly people get very caught up into it. Even Christian people, yet very worldly, get very caught up into it, very emotionally stirred. I mean, it's like they've got a leash around their neck and they're being led by everything happening in the news. Those are people in bondage. They are of the world, even though they are saved. We're of a higher order. We see things differently. We look down, and our view goes through the filter of God's sovereignty, of God's divine providence. of God finishing what He starts, of God building His church and the gates of hell will not prevail, of God's kingdom being established and of its increase and its peace there will be no end. Our view, our perception of life, our perspectives are completely different than the world. And that's why Paul said, don't argue with people. Because arguments always flow out of one realm. Perception. All arguments, all fights flow from one place. Perception. So if we have a big picture view and it's been commandeered by God and we're seeing things now through that filter, how does that change our life? And how does that change our response to life? Now, how does that change our accomplishments in life? And do we suddenly now find ourselves going to the next level in life just from changing our perspective, which changes our response, which changes our results? It's more than just a little equation. It's how life really does work. All right. What y'all got to say about that?
Scott, I think like number 4, surrounding yourself, actually corporate business world gets that better than we do sometimes in the church. Because in a church, it's like-minded people. You find out who kind of matches what you do, and then you go to church there.
Yep.
That's great stuff and all, but there's a whole world of church outside of us that can sharpen us, and that's why it's awesome you're part of the Princeton Ministerial Association. You guys sharpen one another. You're talking to guys with different perspectives, and we all need that. But like in the corporate world, if this is where you are in your skill set, they can say, there's somebody over here that really gets this part of business that you could really learn from. Go let them be your, quote, mentor. And so there's all kinds of business mentors out there, and they run that system, and we don't really make ourselves enough in the church setting to sharpen ourselves with one another. They get there with it.
You are right on the money. So if you've been here a bunch of years, you were over there with us. Here's how we ended up over here. We were in a little building, little sanctuary, had 200 seats in it. And like all sanctuaries, even in a growing church, you never get past 80% full because people don't like to come in and crawl over other people to get in the middle of the row and stuff. So you never get beyond 80% of seating capacity, and that's where we were at. We had long services. I preached a long time. We had an hour of praise and worship. We had church. It was like being at a conference every Sunday morning. That's what I was used to. And I came out of a church world where that was the norm. We started at 10:30, and we were never out before 1 o'clock hardly. And we wanted to grow. And I didn't know how to grow. It's like, well, do I need to preach longer? Do we need to do more worship? I thought we were doing the best we could over there. And then one day, speaking of the Ministerial Association, we had a meeting, and one of the guys says, hey, they're doing a one-day pastor gathering at Highlands in Abington. I said, what's Highlands? They said, well, it's a church down there. I said, well, that sounds non-denominational. I'm in. And someone said, no, it's a Southern Baptist church, but nobody knows. It's covert. But they're growing so fast, they can't build quick enough. And they started in a little building like us, but now they just built this big mammoth building, and they planted a church in Bristol, and they planted a church in Kingsport, and they were growing like crazy. So that's a field trip. I'll still go, but I wasn't ready to learn anything. It was Baptist. How's a charismatic guy going to learn anything from a Baptist? So we go down there for that day, and their praise team plays some music, and we're just worshiping a little bit. It wasn't like our kind of worship. I mean, nobody was on the floor, nobody was dancing or waving banners or anything like that. It really wasn't what I was used to at the time. We've tamed down a lot since then. I don't know what's wrong with you guys, but you can go crazy anytime you want as far as I'm concerned. And then the pastor there, his name was Jimmy, and he got up and he talked, and I liked how he talked. He was very conversational, and he was starting to make sense, and I started to click with some things he was saying. Next thing I knew, in my spirit, I was bonding with that man. There was probably a couple hundred pastors there, but when it was over, I made a beeline to him. I said, "Can I talk to you?" And he said, "Sure." He was a little guy about this tall, little dweeby guy, and he shouldn't have been successful. Successful pastors need to be tall, athletic, good-looking, flowing hair. Since then, by the way, he did such a good job that Rick Warren hired him, and he's on staff with Rick Warren right now. I said, "Can I talk to you?" He said, "Sure." And I introduced myself. I told him our situation. We were a young church. We were like 8 years old. And I said, we're stale. We're not growing, and I don't know what to do. And he said, "Well, you need to go to 2 services." And I said, "Well, no, we've talked about that." I said, "We can't go to 2 services the way that we have church. We couldn't do that because we just go gangbusters, man. It's just like we could never do that." He said, "I don't know why you think that, but that's not true. You can go to 2 services, and you don't have to preach an hour and a half, and you don't have to have over an hour praise and worship." He said, "Those people you have there now, they may like that and they may want that, but the people that aren't there yet, that's not how you're going to hook them. They're not going to come for that long." So I got inspired. I came home and I met with leadership the very next week. I prayed about it, and I met with them. I said, "Guys," I said, "what do you think about us going to 2 services?" The big thing I couldn't understand that I kept talking to Jimmy about was, but how do you do that with children's ministry? How do you do 2 services? How do you get children's workers? How do you work that for 2 services? I just couldn't understand it. He said, "I promise you, if God's in this, people will respond, and that will not even remotely be your issue." Met with leadership. Leadership was all for it. They said, "Let's go for it." We planned. We met with department heads, with teachers. We worked out a plan for it. Met with the praise team, how we're going to do this with 2 services. You all can leave after you play for the 2nd service, but we're going to shorten everything down. I have to shorten my first sermon down because we were going to do 9 o'clock to 10:30. Have a 30-minute changeover. The second one service from 11 to what we said would be 12:30. Could go a little longer the 2nd service though, nothing boxing you in. Well, I still was skeptical, but it's like, okay, that guy said this would work. We put a big banner up out there about going to 2 services, put a little bit of marketing out there. Our first Sunday going to 2 services, we had 50 new people. The first service. Our first service was always about half full, only about 100 people. Our second service, within weeks, was still every chair filled and bringing other chairs out and putting it around the wall. Our second service ended up being bigger than what our whole service was before we ever went to 2 services. That was not my perspective. If I would have been willing to stretch into bigger perspectives, we'd still be over there having our little party every Sunday morning, our little handful, eating it up, but we wouldn't have done 90% of the accomplishments we've had through the years. Be willing to change your perspective in your marriage, in your job, doctrinally, theologically, with God, with everything in life. Be willing to change your perspective. All right, then?